Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Life Alive show. My name is Anne Marie, and I'm the coach behind the seminar and coaching business, A Life Alive. And thank you for tuning in today to the second live episode of the Life Alive show. In today's episode, we are going to be diving into the practice of honoring and what that means in our lives and how honoring our history can inform our present and help us envision our futures. At least I hope that's what's going to happen. So, as I thought about doing this particular episode, I knew that I needed to have my mom on the show. And I'm a little bit nervous about how this is going to go because if you know my mom, she doesn't hold back. She speaks her truth, and I'm hoping that she will do that today. But that means that I have no idea what's going to come up and how it's going to go. So I've given her a little bit of prompting, but anyway, I'm going to call her and we're going to hope that the audio all works because, see, here's what's happening. My mom doesn't have social media, she has no interest in it. So there was no way that she was going to be able to hop on to Facebook Live with me unless I just call her on my phone, and I'm going to use my little Bluetooth speaker here to pipe through the sound. So hopefully you'll be able to hear our conversation. And if it doesn't work out, we'll just chalk that up to experience, won't we? All right, so here we go. I'm gonna call my mom. Let's hope it works.
Hello,
Hey, Mom. How are you today?
I'm good. It's really windy here today.
Yeah, here too. I feel like it's
You
gonna blow the
sound
house
far
over.
away.
Well, I've got you through my speaker. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, but it's going to be a little hard.
Is this better?
No.
Is this better?
Yep.
Okay, so maybe I'll hold the speaker up to my face like it's a microphone.
Sounds better that way.
Good. Well, I think we talked a little bit about, why I wanted to talk to you on my show today. So, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on to my show. It's pretty brave considering that you can't see the audience.
And I'm very private.
Yes. So we might talk about some vulnerable things today. So just keep in mind that this is going on to the interwebs and will live there forever. Anybody can access it.
Do they know my identity?
They know you're my mom.
Okay.
Is that okay?
All right. Yep.
All right. So the theme of today's show is the practice of honoring. And I thought of this theme on Monday when I was writing my newsletter because Monday was International Women's Day. And it got me thinking about how the women in our ancestry have, and their stories and how they've influenced our lives. And I thought it would be like the perfect opportunity to talk to you and get your input on all of this.
Okay. I'll do my best.
So I kind of wonder if, off the top of your head, if you have any thoughts about, how you feel influenced by the women in your ancestry.
Well, I probably, was most influenced by my mother. And I didn't get to know my grandmothers very well because my one grandmother I didn't get to know at all because she died when my dad was still a teen, but I knew her mother better than I knew my own, any of my other grandparents because we used to go visit her, and they lived in Owasso. So my great grandmother, but I really, I liked her and everything, and I loved her, but I was not thinking about asking questions. So I don't know how much of an influence she really had. Um, so I would have to still go back to my mother. My own mother had the most influence of all my ancestors.
When I think about your mom, my grandma, because she died when I was 9, I remember I have like some very specific memories of her. First of all, spending time in the kitchen when she was baking bread. She had a drawer in the kitchen that was built in that Grandpa built for her that she kept all the flour in. And
Mm-hmm.
she let us play in the flour when we were little. And she let us help her, knead the dough. And I I find myself in this stage of my life thinking back on that memory and almost feeling her presence with me as I pick up some of those domestic habits in this phase of my life.
Yes, I think, Grandma was, um, she was, all that she ever wanted in life was to have a family. She loved children, and of course, that was her whole main focus was raising us children, and then she just relished having the grandchildren around when she could have the grandchildren around. So that was what was most important to her.
How is that?
And
How is that translated into your own life?
oh, very much so. Except I'm not the domestic um, person. I don't focus on baking. I did that a lot when when you and Dale were young. I did a lot of home canning and preparation of food and not eating out of pre-prepared things, especially the first, I don't know, 8 or 9 years of your life, because I was very focused on your health and not having food additives and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't do a lot of baking. I just was like preparing one meal the next. I was always working. So, I mean, most of the time I worked outside of the home. So I had to balance all that. But I did do a lot of canning and that in the summer and then early fall. And my mom taught me all that because we did that every year on the farm. We raised everything that we ate and we canned and we put things in the freezer. So I was raised to do all that, and I knew how to do all that from my mom. I don't do it so much anymore. I put things in the freezer, but I don't do any canning.
Did Grandma learn that from her mom?
Absolutely not. Oh, my mother's my grandmother Halstead. Probably shouldn't even say her name. But anyway, my grandmother, my mom's mother, um, she became a widow, and she still had 2 young girls to finish raising. My mom was a twin, so her and her twin sister were 13, and
Mom, your phone's ringing.
I don't have to answer it. I know who it is. I can call him back.
Can you turn it off?
Anyway, it never rings in my house, but when I'm on this phone, I guess it does.
Can you turn it off?
Yeah. But anyway, my grandmother was very resilient, but what she had to do, because they were poor, she had to become very self-reliant and finish raising these children. And so she took a job at I think it was a dairy, where she worked the counter and she did dishes and things like that. And she had to walk about a mile to get there, and then about that to get back home. So after her husband died, my grandfather, she um, had to work very hard, and then she kept doing that to support herself. even after they grew up and were married. So I think she was very self-reliant, and I think that got passed down to me.
I think so too. I feel like one of the lessons early in my life that you tried to instill in me was to never depend on others, to be able to take care of myself.
I remember talking to you about that because I always felt like, I went through a period of my life where I felt vulnerable, that I needed to be able to, I felt like I really needed to be able to have, be self-reliant, self-sufficient, and be in charge of my own life. So, but that kind of happened more or less after Grandma died.
Yeah, and this part of your timeline um, was really coming up for me as I was preparing for this show too. Like, um, I don't know if you also find this interesting, but I didn't start. I didn't find it interesting until more recently to look back and see that both you and I had made pretty significant life changes shortly after, in midlife, shortly after we had lost, a parent, after one of our
Yes.
parents had died. And for me, that was when I was 38. I was
Mm-hmm.
37 when Daddy died, but I made the decision at 38 to shift the course of my career. And you said to me something like, along the lines of that you really couldn't say anything against it because you had done the same thing. And that really stuck out to me as like, oh, there's something here. This is interesting.
Yes. Well, I was 38 when my mother died. I was almost 39, but I was still 38. And the grief was so profound. I know I was buried in that you probably remember, I was buried in that grief for well over a year, close to 2 years before I could, I was just on rote. But I cried. I know I cried every day for over a year, mostly when I was alone. But after I came out of that loss and the grief, that was so heavy, I decided that I don't know, right? That's when I made that decision that I needed to go back to college and that life was really short, and I also had kind of a vision then, like, of seeing you and your brother, like, not needing me anymore. It's just like you were getting to that age pretty soon. You were going to be in middle school and high school, and then, that someday I was going to not have my children to look after on a daily basis anymore. So I just think I was looking for another purpose too, because up till then, it seemed like my life was centered around my family, around my children.
Well, I drew on that story of yours so many times, after I left high school. Like, I remember my first year of undergrad being really, really hard, as an 18-year-old. And there were so many days when I cried and just wanted to give up, but I knew that I could keep going because you had done it and I had seen you do it. Um, so I don't know, like, I feel like there's something to seeing our ancestors be strong or do something resilient that shows us that we can do it too.
Yes, my mother was very strong too, even though um, after the war, when my dad came back from the war, but before that, when she graduated high school, she went to cosmetology school because I don't she knew that she had to work to provide for herself, and she then got a job in Cleveland. So she would ride the bus from Painesville to Cleveland, every day for her job, and then would ride back at the end of the day. And her twin sister, um, she went to nursing school and became an LPN. So they were raised knowing they had to take care of themselves. But then, after my mom and dad got married, she met my dad after she was working and everything. After they got married, they moved to, he was stationed in Maine. So they moved to Maine and they lived up there for, I don't know, probably close to a year. And then my dad was shipped out and my mom was pregnant. She was left all alone in Maine and her family was in Ohio. And he was shipped to the South Pacific. And here she's going to have a baby. So she had to stay there till after the baby was born. And then she went back to Ohio and stayed with her mother and her sister until my dad returned from the war. And then later on in life, I thought it was really hard because her and her sister were very, very close. And her mom too. But after my dad came back from the war, then they moved to Michigan. My mom and dad moved to Michigan to live with my grandfather, and my grandfather and my dad farmed together. So that's when my mother learned all of those things like canning and freezing of, the garden produce, and my dad taught her all that.
And do you think
baking bread, but I always felt like, that was pretty awesome that she moved like that, knowing she would only see her family every once in a while for the rest of her life.
And do you think that there were instances in your own life that you reflected on her story and that it helped you along your own journey?
Oh yes, I think so too. I do think that. I think I was very close to my mother, and after my mother passed away, then I became closer to her sister, her twin sister, my aunt, and I went to see her just about every year. I don't know if you remember going there, but
I do. I remember one time in particular that she had a really great sense of humor, and I remember that she had a moonflower plant and how she tricked Dale and I into, watching it very quietly unfold under the moonlight. And this day, I still, want to have a moonflower plant in my yard because of that.
Yeah, we had one for a while here.
I was so sad when you ripped it out.
Well, they take over. They also get worms in them. I didn't want those. They're like the same as the tomato worms.
Oh, gross.
They gave me the heebie-jeebies.
Well,
yeah, I think, back in my family, I've been doing genealogy. I've been looking through genealogy quite a bit since this COVID.
Yeah.
Because I was home, and I had all these pictures that were my grandfather's on my dad's side. And I had pictures that my aunt, my mom's twin sister, had given me from my mom's side of the family. So, I got these 2 tubs with pictures in that I need to do something with. I've been sitting there for a long time.
And why do you think it's important? Because, on the one aspect, I think, boy, if we kept everything that our ancestors passed down to us, we would just be covered in junk. But this seems to be really important to you. So why do you think that is?
The pictures are really important to me because a lot of them, I love to have pictures of people that I actually knew. And I love to have those pictures as far back as even before I knew them, because I wanted to know what they looked like. And I wonder what their lives were like. Because as a kid and as a young, as a teenager, when they were alive and I was still around to ask them, the thought never crossed my mind. Not that I wasn't interested in their life. It's just I think, like most people, very egocentric as a child,
Yeah. So what do you think?
But the pictures now mean a lot to me because it's just like these are my people. These are who I came from. And then as I learned by going back, and I put them in an album, and I looked up dates of their births and deaths, and significant things that happened, marriages, and I learned, or reminded me of how their lives were. Because my grandmother on my dad's side, that I never got to know, her family, there were 5 daughters. There were no sons, and they were all sent away from home at a young age to work for someone else, and didn't even get the opportunity to finish school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's how my grandparents actually met. Because my grandfather was a blacksmith,
Mm-hmm.
and my grandmother was a domestic. Do you know what a domestic is?
It's like a servant, right? Like they clean and
She worked. Yeah, she worked in the home, and I'm not sure what all she did. She probably cleaned and cooked and looked after the children. I don't know. I just know she was a domestic. She was a teenager.
So why does this
that's how they met. But even going back further, my great grandfather came to this country from Germany, and he was a young boy, 5 or 6 years old when they came. But by the time he was 7, he was farmed out to work.
So why does it feel to you that it's important to know this stuff about ancestors that we maybe never even knew in our lives?
I have a very strong interest in the history of, where my family came from. I don't know enough. I discovered things just doing this,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's the ties. It's the family ties. It's like
it sort of has a way of like grounding you and making you feel more connected, doesn't it?
Yeah, and these are people. A lot of them I didn't even know at all. But I knew my grandfather. I lived in the same house my whole life. From because he and my dad farmed together.
It's so different from a lot of us in our modern lives.
They're just always wondered about her, the one I didn't get to know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned some things over the years just by listening to people talk. But
it sort of fills in some gaps that inform who you are.
Yeah. Yep.
What do you feel like is important about what you're learning that you hope to pass on to Dale and I, or to your grandchildren?
Well, I've been putting pictures in albums because I thought it's important to me, so I want to pass that on to you. I don't know if you remember when I made you a heritage album.
Of course I remember. I still have that, of course.
And that was, at that point, I thought it was important to know, for you to know who your ancestors were, as far as I knew, far back as I knew. And hopefully, their stories will go on, because I think part of this is from losing people. It's from, having my mother pass away, and my grandfather. I remember when my grandfather passed away, you were a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And that had an impact on me, a big impact, because he held you a couple of times before he died.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time I saw him, he was in the hospital, and he says, "Where's the baby?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He wanted me to bring you, and I couldn't, because they didn't allow that at that time. Mm-hmm. They didn't allow children to come in for visiting. But, I think those kind of moments kind of come in my brain, and I think about family connection is important to me. I'm the one that goes down to the cemeteries and
Mm-hmm.
makes sure everybody's remembered. It just has always been a really strong thing for me, strong
mm-hmm.
pull, I guess. And my ancestors on my mother's side, they're in Ohio, so I don't get to visit their graves, or I haven't, I've done it a couple of times, but that's all.
Mm-hmm. So something that it kind of came up to me was like realizing in this phase of my life that when I do certain things, it's like I can imagine or I feel emotionally connected to my ancestors. Does that ever happen for you?
Yes. Yep, it happens a lot, especially with Dad and my mother and my dad. Happens a lot. And I think looking at pictures brings back memories, helps you go back in time, Like, oh, I remember this. And then you kind of remember how you felt back then at the time that those pictures were and what you were doing. So, yeah.
Do you feel like that, plays any practical role in just how you're living day to day? Does it impact you in a positive way?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I think it's more impactful now, at this point in my life, because I'm in my senior years. I think things change. I think you go through stages in your life, and I think a lot of things that I learned in my life, I copied, a lot what my parents did, because that's how I learned. So as I went through my adulthood, you go through stages. When your children are really babies and real small and new, it takes a lot of energy, and as you're raising your children, it just, you put everything you have into that, which is what I did. Even though I worked outside of the home as well, my main focus was on the children. So it's like you do that to exhaustion almost. And then when you get older, you realize, this isn't going to be forever. So I can see very many stages in my life, and now I'm in this stage where I want to still be productive, but I love being retired. And I've done volunteer work, mission work, and that kind of stuff. But a lot of that, and then I had a lot of years of looking after my father, and
it feels like I feel like the amount of energy that I have started to feel into my ancestry in this phase of my life has really enriched it.
Well, I can't imagine not knowing anything, people not knowing anything, how difficult it must be to not have roots,
Absolutely. And I think
to not know
for a lot
more,
of people,
about their parents or their grandparents or where they came from. I just think that is, I think it's part of our DNA. It's built into us to want to know.
I feel like that's part of the healing that we're still trying to start doing, some of us anyway, with like the Native Americans and the African Americans in our country, because so many of them don't know.
Yes, I've watched quite a few documentaries about that.
That's a whole different topic. We're not going to go down that road today.
Yeah, okay.
Well, this has been a really wonderful conversation. Thank you for agreeing to come on my show, and I'll post it on YouTube so you can watch it, okay?
Okay, well, I don't know if I want to.
Well, it's been awesome. Thanks for coming on. I'm going to hang up now. I'll call you later. I've got to finish my show.
Okay, I love you.
Love you, Mom. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you guys for tuning in with that off-the-cuff conversation with my mom. I don't know about you, but I definitely gleaned some nuggets from that. And I think that's all I want to say about it at this point. I'm kind of glowing. I'm excited. I want to finish the show, and I'll post it on YouTube and we'll move on. So please share in the comments your thoughts, your reactions, what you'd like to see more or less of as I move forward with this project. And otherwise, be well, everybody. Bye-bye.